$2.6 billion, that's how much China spent in 2023 alone, on lithography equipment from ASML. And now it's all gone up in smoke. The tech earthquake is already starting to spread no more. ASML, no more TSMC in their place. A cold declaration from Beijing, we'll do it ourselves, and we'll do it better. China is now considering a full termination of its technical and trade relations with two tech giants, ASML from the Netherlands and TSMC from Taiwan. But this isn't your typical farewell, it's a goodbye with no return. So what triggered it? The United States applied pressure, forcing the Dutch government to revoke export licenses for DUV machines, a crucial technology for producing advanced chips. $15 billion worth of machinery inside China was effectively bricked. No maintenance, no updates, no support, a clean stab in the back. In China, it responded without mercy. This was not a knee-jerk reaction as early as 2022. China quietly began restructuring its entire domestic semiconductor industry. They funneled over $75 billion through state-backed investment funds targeting key areas like chip design, wafer production, and lithography technology. But it wasn't just about money. China also recruited over 50,000 engineers, many from Huawei SMIC, or even returning talent from Silicon Valley in just 3 years. China achieved what the world thought would take a decade, building an almost fully localized chip supply chain. Factories are now operating with 60 to 70% China-made equipment, and local labs are developing both chips and design software that are made in China. China is no longer playing catch-up. They're starting to reshape the game. The biggest surprise, China doesn't need EUV, the $200 million machines from ASML, once considered the holy grail of chip making. Instead, CCAR, a company based in Shenzhen, claims it has developed its own Dove lithography technology, capable of producing chips under 7 nanometer. Remember the Huawei Mate 60 Pro? Its 7-nanometer chip was manufactured entirely with banned DUV technology, and it left the global tech world stunned. And just recently, SMIC announced it has entered testing stages for 5-nanometer chips, with ambitions to push toward 3 nanometer using AI-powered yield optimization and quad patterning techniques. China isn't playing catch-up anymore. It's leaping ahead. When China stopped buying from TSMC and ASML's revenue plunged by 27% in Q4 of 2024, a direct hit to Europe's tech backbone. But the story doesn't end with semiconductors. China began dumping U.S. government bonds and quietly pulling out of major tech stocks like Apple, Nvidia, and others. The chip war is no longer just about silicon, it's becoming a full-blown currency war. And if Beijing succeeds in shaking global markets, the first to feel the pain is mortgage rates could skyrocket, tech stocks could tank, and retirement funds. They could evaporate. Just a few strategic sell-offs from Beijing, and Wall Street could start to tremble. This isn't just a fight over chips anymore. It's a fight over your wallet, your stability, and your future. A new era is rising, one that's no longer shaped by Silicon Valley, but by what some now call Dragon Valley, where China builds chips capital and influence. SMIC now holds nearly 20% of global market share. That's 4 times what it had in 2020. China isn't just making chips anymore. It's redefining the game. And if you're holding a smartphone, driving a car, or running a business, chances are the future powering your technology is already being etched in DUV light. Straight from Shenzhen, America punishes China thinking it would cancel them. But who knew the little brother would rise up and become a tech superpower, stressing out the whole industry for a long time? The U.S. has been the big brother in the semiconductor industry. Intel, AMD, Texas Instruments, and countless other giants all hail from the U.S. They not only dominate the technology, but also control the global semiconductor market, making the whole world tip its hat in admiration. The U.S. is the big brother, right? They were born to dominate semiconductor technology, bringing the world powerful processors, cutting-edge chips, and of course, cash flowing into their banks. But then China, a name once in the shadows, started to rise up, noticing the $700 billion semiconductor pie being sliced, and thought, why not take a slice? The U.S. could not let a younger sibling who had contributed nothing to the industry suddenly ask for a piece of the pie. That's when the U.S. decided to act. They weren't about to let China step into their game. What did the U.S. think? I can't let my little brother beat me, and thus sanctions were set in motion. First came the ban. The U.S. decided to hit hard tightening by restricting exports to 140 Chinese companies. Even China's chip-making equipment manufacturers like Nora Technology Group didn't escape, with companies like Piotech and Securier Technology being threatened too. Did the U.S. think they would crush China's dreams? They were wrong. China didn't cry whine or post a threatening message on Truth Social like some others would. Instead, China flipped the script. Rather than submit, they stood tall and declared sanctions. We will turn that into motivation. And just like that, China injected $410 billion into the semiconductor R&D sector. Imagine this, the U.S. boycott. But China plays back with an aggressive strategy, pumping money into technology, building a self-sustaining semiconductor ecosystem, and not stopping there. They cut down imports from the West, leaving the U.S. shocked as they lost the massive semiconductor market of their own. In 2024, China reduced semiconductor imports from the U.S. and other Western countries by almost 50%. At this point, the U.S. didn't know what to do, as China stood firm in the semiconductor game without relying on anyone. The world suddenly had a new king in the semiconductor tech world. By now, the U.S. was probably in shock. The sweet semiconductor pie they once held tightly in their hands was now slipping away. The U.S. sat there like an older brother, looking at his younger sibling from behind, realizing that they had messed everything up when China became the major chip producer. The U.S. couldn't believe it. The sanctions that were supposed to slow China down only fueled their younger siblings' passion. China's global semiconductor market share doubled from 15% to 30%. And now the U.S. was faced with the painful truth. China was no longer the little brother. They had become a formidable competitor in the tech industry. Now, China wasn't just learning the lessons, they were acing them. Not only were they producing 7-nanometer chips, but they had also surpassed Intel and TSMC in the chip technology race. The U.S. and Western companies must be eating their dust as they watch China make huge strides in the semiconductor industry. But China didn't stop there. They made breakthroughs in any flash memory technology. YMTC, a Chinese company, is now producing 232-layer ND flash memory, a superior technology that the U.S. can't keep up with. Now, China is not only self-producing chips, but is also leading in storage technology. The U.S. at this point isn't just being left behind. They're now watching China smile triumphantly. Now the U.S. is left staring at China from behind, as China has developed strong capabilities and is ready to take the lead in the semiconductor industry. China didn't just beat the U.S., but also made companies like ASML in applied materials uncomfortable, as they found themselves caught between complying with sanctions and maintaining profits from China. The U.S. is no longer number one. China is ready to take the throne in the semiconductor tech industry, and the U.S. can only watch. The world has changed, and China is no longer just the younger sibling. They are the big challenger the U.S. now faces. When Trump said, "I will impose global tariffs," the whole world heard the echo, and of course, Europe couldn't sit still. China went crazy while the U.S. played the boss in this tariff game. But in the end, who will be the loser? The EU, the most stubborn when facing Trump, ultimately turned around like a boat drifting in the storm. At first, Ursula von der Leyen, president of the European Commission, called for global resistance to Trump's tariff strategy, even claiming the global economy will collapse. We're already finalizing the first package of countermeasures in response to tariffs on steel, and we're now preparing for further countermeasures to protect our interests and our businesses if negotiations fail. But then just a few days later, the EU surprised everyone by making a complete turnaround. Ursula announced, "We are ready to negotiate with the United States. Indeed, we have offered 0 for 0 tariffs for industrial goods, as we have successfully done with many other trading partners, because Europe is always ready for a good deal." What seemed like a roadblock turned the EU into the loser in this tariff game. And you can imagine at that moment, everyone in Brussels was probably thinking, spending another $3 trillion is nothing compared to continuing to argue with Trump. But no worries, because Trump still wins, whether the EU wants to sit at the negotiation table or not. China is no pushover, while the EU chose to flip-flop. China went crazy and refused to lose. Trump demanded China remove the 34% retaliatory tariffs. But the answer from Beijing was no way. China didn't back down. Instead, they escalated by imposing another 34% tariff, restricting the export of rare earth materials and placing restrictions on about 30 U.S. organizations, mostly in defense-related industries. Adding to the 24 U.S. companies already targeted by Trump's tariffs, it's clear they're betting on an all-out war. Trump, as always, didn't give up. He even threatened further. If you don't remove the tariffs, I'll impose 50% more or even 104%. Who knows in the end, this tariff battle became like a boxing match between two giants with both sides throwing hard hits. Raising tariffs could kill the global economy, but China had no choice but to respond strongly. Canada might stay silent, but don't let them hold the ace card of crude oil. Prime Minister Danielle Smith declared that could sign deals with European refineries with Indian refineries. We could actually redirect those purchases somewhere else, and that would solve our trade deficit if necessary. Canada could easily redirect its oil exports to Europe. Instead of supplying the U.S., Canada currently supplies about 4 million barrels of oil per day to the U.S., with 700,000 barrels being exported to the Gulf Coast. But this is the number Trump needs to pay attention to, because if Canada turns its back, the U.S. will face a crude oil shortage. So can the U.S. easily replace Canada's oil? The answer is not that simple. US refineries will have to bear a massive change, and Canada could truly shock the global energy market if it redirects its exports. Fuel retail experts say this price hike will soon hit gas stations in New England, potentially adding an extra 20 to 40 cents per gallon. Now, we have to ask the question, what do U.S. industries think when this tariff W explodes? Do the big car manufacturers like BMW, Audi, and Mercedes now get discounts? The answer is no. They're dropping bombs over the high tariffs, and American workers are the ones paying the heaviest price. U.S. companies now have two options: close down or cut production. But no matter the choice, the workers will bear the consequences. Even the U.S. technology sector is in trouble. Silicon Valley companies have lost millions of dollars as they can't export to the Chinese market. One of their largest, Trump, is becoming the destroyer of what has been built over decades now. A difficult but important question: does Trump understand that his strategy could collapse the U.S. economy? If he's not careful, 62% of workers in industrial states are crying over Trump's tariffs. And it's not just big corporations. Farmers are also speaking out against it. I don't know where it ends. I hope it ends soon. I hope it ends with us willing to be good partners with these countries around the world and be willing to sit down at the table. If this trade war continues, it's not just workers but farmers too who will bear the brunt of the damage. Not to mention the entire U.S. economy could collapse without timely adjustments. Don't change the channel, because this tariff strategy might turn Trump into the winner. While all of us are the losers, a tariff storm is sinking everything from the price of your morning coffee to relationships with longtime allies. Are Americans paying the price for Trump's policies? The Trump administration once again begins with controversial economic decisions under the guise of protecting national interests. Trump imposes a series of high tariffs on steel, aluminum, and cars, not just on traditional rivals, but also on longtime allies like Canada and Germany. One of the reasons given to stop fentanyl, a dangerous opioid, from entering the U.S. via Canada. However, data shows less than 1% of fentanyl in the U.S. comes from Canada, making this argument rather weak. Meanwhile, the consequences of these tariffs are clear in everyday life. Gas prices are rising, food is becoming more expensive, the financial markets are volatile. Americans, especially working-class citizens and retirees, are feeling the full impact of these policies. What was supposed to be a strong stance is now becoming a financial burden on ordinary Americans while creating global turmoil. Canada has stopped staying silent. Foreign Minister Melanie Joly publicly declared the relationship between the U.S. and Canada will never be the same. They want to do things differently, and we understand that, and that's why we will seek to make sure that we get to an agreement. After heavy tariffs were placed on steel, aluminum, and cars exported to the U.S., Canada immediately retaliated by imposing its own tariffs on U.S. goods. This isn't just about economics, it's a strategic loss of trust between two nations with the longest border in the world. Prime Minister Mark Carney also spoke out. "I will reject all attempts to weaken Canada, all attempts to wear us down, to break us down, so that America can only say Canada is ready to protect its citizens. interests and urging the American people to speak up to their political representatives. This confrontation is no longer confined to the negotiation table. It's spilling over into the social fabric of both countries. American businesses aren't immune to the damage as they lose a stable supply chain. What was once considered a model of cooperation, the U.S. and Canada now stand on the verge of a breakdown of trust that has lasted for decades. China reacted strongly to the new U.S. tariffs, including tariffs as high as 104%. The Chinese government declared it would retaliate if forced with measures like increasing tariffs on soybeans and sorghum, key U.S. exports. They also suspended cooperation on fentanyl control and limited American products and services from movies to financial firms. China's hardline response became even more evident after U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance made a controversial statement calling Chinese manufacturers farmers. This wave of strong opposition from China has only heightened tensions between the two nations, and the trade war continues to cause losses for both countries. As the trade conflict spread, Germany became the next target when President Trump publicly criticized the country's clean energy policy. The Germany was finished, they went to win. The wind wasn't blowing too much, and they went to all sorts of other things. You know, the Green New scam hit Germany too. And guess what? Now they're back to coal. Chancellor Angela Merkel immediately responded, emphasizing that Germany's green economy is the result of years of investment in sustainable development, aimed at reducing emissions and protecting the environment, to demand that a pioneering nation in energy transition revert to an older model, put the bilateral relationship in a tense position for Germany. This is not just a policy issue. It's a fundamental principle that cannot be compromised. The new tariff policies aren't just about trade between nations. They're creeping into every meal, every bill that ordinary Americans face at a grocery store in New York. Essential items like bananas, shrimp, salmon, and coffee are all facing new tariffs. Specifically, bananas from Costa Rica and Ecuador are taxed at 10%. Shrimp from Indonesia faces a 32% tariff, while shrimp from Vietnam faces a 46% tariff. Salmon imported from Norway is hit with a 16% tariff, and coffee from Brazil and Ethiopia also faces 10% tariffs. Not every product will see an immediate price hike, but grocery stores operate on thin profit margins, and once stockpiles run out, prices will soar. What's even more concerning is this: it's the everyday Americans, the ones shopping every day, living on pensions, working blue-collar jobs. They will be the first to feel the impact of these policies, and they will feel it the most. Stay tuned, because what comes next could be even hotter than what you've already heard. 104% import tariff. Mr. Trump pushes U.S.-China into the most dangerous economic confrontation. 104% import tariff, over $700 billion vanished in a single trading session. China tightens control on rare metals. Is this the final line in the U.S.-China relationship? The U.S. strikes first. From the very beginning of the year, the White House leader launched a series of bold measures. February 10% tariff, March, another 10%. Then just a week ago, a sudden jump to 34%. Now the 47th president threatens a further 50% hike in total U.S. tariffs on Chinese goods, could hit a staggering 104%, an unthinkable number. Imagine this: a $20 toy, now $40, a $400 iPhone, now $800 a car. The price could jump by $6,000 to $12,000 per vehicle. The American leader insists this is a punishment for Beijing, especially as China has responded with its own tariffs. But is this a win for Washington or a lever that could unleash global chaos? China hits back. China didn't stay silent. Beijing immediately imposed a 34% tariff on all U.S. goods. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. The real strike lies in supply. China announced restrictions on rare earth exports, materials considered the lifeblood of modern technology. They control up to 90% of the global supply elements like dysprosium, terbium, or neodymium. While unfamiliar, are the key to manufacturing electric vehicle batteries, military radars, semiconductors, and night vision devices starting this month. U.S. companies wanting these materials, they must apply for a license, and approval isn't easy. Analysts are calling this a disguised export ban, global fallout. So what are the consequences? Just one night after Washington's threat, Asian stock markets went into free fall. Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index plunged over 13%, the sharpest drop in nearly 3 decades. Shanghai Composite tumbled over 7%, wiping out $500 billion in market value, and it didn't stop there. ES markets felt the shock waves too. Wall Street dropped between 10 to 15% within days. Investors rushed to exit hedge funds, moved to gold and treasuries. One expert called this a shock therapy that could kill the patient, a dangerous game. The two superpowers are now locked in a game of who blinks first. But unlike a typical standoff, this time the entire global economy is standing on the sideline and trembling when the two largest economies in the world slap tariffs so high they nearly form a trade embargo, an endless fight. The real issue here: what is the true goal of the U.S. leadership? To raise revenue for the country, to force companies back into domestic production, or just a psychological move to gain advantage in unrelated negotiations? Meanwhile, Beijing accuses Washington's tariff policies of economic abuse, violating global trade principles and threatening the world economic order. Each side holds its ground, but the gap between them is now turned into a deep abyss. Don't look away if you don't want to miss the biggest economic turning point of this century: a sudden ambush. China orders a freeze on all investments in the U.S., a quiet decision with devastating power, potentially pushing the U.S. economy into an unprecedented financial crisis in just a few years. The decline in China's investment in the U.S. has been a shock. From $46 billion in 2016, China's investment in the U.S. dropped to only $2.3 billion in 2024. And now, with China completely freezing these investments, that number is nearly zero. A big question arises: why has China decided to completely cut off this flow of capital? The answer is not simple. China is not just stopping its investments, they are executing a long-term strategy, redirecting capital away from the U.S. and investing in regions that are more beneficial to them politically and economically. This is not a random shift. It's a strategic, calculated move. At the same time, U.S. businesses are facing a financial nightmare. In just one night, companies like Hartwell Tech lost $180 million to survive. They had to take out emergency loans with interest rates as high as 11.3%, nearly double the normal rate. This not only throws them into a precarious financial situation, but could push these companies to the brink of bankruptcy. If this situation persists, high interest rates are not just a headache for large businesses, but they also directly impact American consumers, because these loans will eventually translate into higher prices for goods and services that they have to pay. Finally, this is not only affecting companies, but also directly threatening consumers. Tariffs on goods from China are causing consumer prices to skyrocket. On average, each household in the U.S. will have to spend an additional $1,950 per year just to meet basic consumption needs. At the same time, profits of companies in the S&P 500 are plummeting while inflation remains high at 3.6%. This means that people will face a decline in quality of life, with wages staying stagnant, but prices continuing to rise. Large projects seen as symbols of the recovery of the U.S. economy are being paused or canceled. For example, Intel's chip factories and projects related to batteries and robotics in Ohio have been suspended due to a lack of funding from China. Furthermore, 62% of manufacturers in the U.S. report they are facing severe financial shortages in their plans for expanding production. And this isn't just affecting large companies, it's also threatening millions of jobs in the U.S. as domestic manufacturing projects are delayed or canceled, causing significant losses to the economy. It's not stopping. Their capital is fleeing the U.S. market at a rapid pace. $120 billion has been withdrawn from U.S. stock ETFs in just 90 days. This is not just a temporary dip, but a clear sign of a capital exodus. Investors are growing concerned about the stability and long-term prospects of the U.S. economy, especially as other countries are seeking opportunities in alternative markets. Countries that were once major partners in investing in the U.S., such as Norway and Japan, are now also cutting back their investments in the U.S. market. This not only leaves the U.S. economy with a capital shortage, but also significantly reduces the financial power of the nation, affecting its ability to maintain global strength as the world's largest economy. The U.S. is currently facing a debt wall worth $4.1 trillion from businesses that will mature by 2026. And in the context of foreign capital, pulling out U.S. companies are now relying on junk bonds with yields as high as 9.6%, 6% twice the rate in 2022. This is a clear sign that a debt crisis is looming, and U.S. businesses will likely face higher borrowing costs and significant challenges in maintaining operations. U.S. stocks are tumbling for the second day. The Dow is already down 1,000 points after dropping almost 1,700 points. Trump's tariff policies are pushing the people into a tough spot. Are you ready to face the consequences of this? U.S. stocks are plunging not just for one day, but for 2 straight days. In the last 48 hours, the Dow Jones has lost over 1,700 points. Big companies once used to trading aggressively with international partners are now facing a market that is no longer as easy as before. Giants like Apple, Qualcomm, and Tesla couldn't escape this shock as China announces a 34% tariff on U.S. goods worth up to $143 billion a year. China has hit back today, announcing an extra 34% tax on all American goods being sold there. They've accused the U.S. of bullying and endangering the global trade order. And in the last few minutes, Donald Trump has accused China of panicking in their response. Then there's the rout on the markets right after Trump announced a 25% tariff on $200 billion worth of Chinese goods. Beijing did not back down immediately. China retaliates with a 34% tariff on U.S. goods, especially agricultural products like soybeans, corn, and processed foods. This is a hard blow to the U.S. agriculture industry, especially as farmers are already struggling with the broader economic challenges. So, what does this mean for the U.S. economy? According to the U.S. International Trade Commission, these new tariffs could cause the U.S. GDP to drop by 0.5% and directly impact 500,000 jobs in industries that rely on exports. On top of that, U.S. consumers will face higher prices for goods, especially food and tech products. Past 80 years trade between the European Union and the United States has created millions of jobs. Consumers across the Atlantic have benefited from reduced prices. Businesses have benefited from huge opportunities leading to unprecedented growth and prosperity. Reaching for tariffs as your first and last tool will not fix it. This is why from the outset we have always been ready to negotiate with the United States. Europe is gearing up for a big showdown with the U.S. as Trump's tariff policies are driving up the cost of many imported goods from these countries. The European Union (EU) might begin retaliating with tariffs on U.S. goods, especially tech and agricultural products. Countries like France, Germany, and the UK are considering importing more from China, which could make China an even bigger trade partner for the EU. In fact, China has ramped up exports to Europe in 2023, with Chinese products, particularly electronics and steel, becoming more attractive with lower tariffs than U.S. goods. Sure, taxing other countries might bring in a large amount of money for the U.S. government, but in the long run, the American people will have to face higher prices at the end of the day. That the tariffs don't really make sense, making it so that things are more expensive for American consumers. And then what will happen in all likelihood is it'll be harder for American exporters to export because of retaliatory tariffs. What we're looking at is a shrinking economy and higher prices. The answer might not be clear right now, but the uncertainty in the current trade policies will be one of the most crucial factors affecting investors, businesses, and consumers in the years to come. At the same time, the global market will continue to adjust, seeking a balance between tariffs and free trade. Remember, even though we may be in the middle of a trade war, the biggest impact will come from government decisions and changes in national policies. And in the end, it will be the people who bear the heaviest. This is a huge move by China. Cutting off ASML and TSMC has massive implications for the global tech supply chain. If $500 billion really vanish from the market, it shows just how vulnerable the U.S. and global economy are to semiconductor tensions. Trump's reaction might be loud, but the real concern is how the U.S. plans to respond strategically.